So my name is Zah Joseph. I'm an Indigenous Services Advisor. I also work on Indigenous initiatives and partnerships and special projects. I'm very honored to be here, welcoming everyone today. I'm a team member with Indigenous Services, but also with the Diversity Circles project. I want to acknowledge some of the team members that made this session happen today. We have Nadia. Do you want to stand up? Say hello. Yay. We have Trina. Yay. Kyla's in the background. Shannon Kelly. There we are. Wafaa is here as well. And who am I forgetting? Annabelle is right here. That's right, yeah. And the reason I left Annabelle for last is because she has been hard at work with the harassment and discrimination prevention advisor role. And unfortunately, she is moving back down under. So I just wanted to give her a round of applause for all the great work she's done. And also recognize how challenging that has been and the great advocacy that she's had for employees here at BCIT and students. So I'd like to welcome everyone and acknowledge the territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. We are here today to talk about racial discrimination and acknowledge the day today. Why we're looking at the different Diversity Circle projects is to not only bring together a commonality and a safe space, but also a acknowledgement of the similarities and challenges that we share throughout our day-to-day at work and in students and support. There's a note to sign in to remember to sign in to our sign-in page up front. And I will get into the day itself. On this day in 1960, a group of demonstrators came together in a day of peaceful protest against the apartheid laws of South Africa. As they gathered in front of the police station in the township of Sharpeville, police opened fire on the crowd. 249 people were injured as a result of police actions. 69 demonstrators were killed. 6 years later, the United Nations General Assembly declared March 21st to be an annual UN Day of Observance, and a reminder of the need to oppose all forms of racism and discrimination. Even a country as well regarded as Canada, we cannot afford the luxury of complacency, said Teresa Wu Pao, chairperson of the board, Canadian Race Relations, CRRF. The increase in the number of the hate crimes recorded by Statistics Canada and the rise of intolerant speech is both the public square and the online environment challenges us to build bridges to our fellow Canadians rather than walls to separate us. We live together today in a highly interconnected world. The recent mass shooting at 2 mosques in New Zealand, motivated by racial hatred and seemingly inspired by Alexander Bissonnat's murderous attack at the Islamic Cultural Center of Quebec City in January 2017, must remind us of the ease with which hatred and violence can spread. Nations can only thrive if there's a shared belief in the stories and the values that bind us together, said Dr. Lillian M.A., CRFF Executive Director. The stories that we share must continue to be stories of opening doors to those who are in danger, of respecting the rights of fellow Canadians, and of honoring those through honest efforts at reconciliation, the historic relationship between the Indigenous people of this land and those who came later. So as you see, we're moving forward, but it's not easy. It's a way that we can, in events such as this, connect and help each other in navigating some of these challenging topics. I would like to call up two friends to now continue on with our welcome. We have Aaron Nelson Moody, or Splash, from Squamish Nation, and we have our awesome Mohawk friend, Winnie Miller, who will be on our panel as well. So I'll bring the two up.
Noel CMC, Leich Kun Toxin Yakwala, CI. Going to share with you a song that I was told has been sung here for about the last 10 to 15,000 years. When people came to our shores or trails across the inland, we would greet them at the edge of our territory to make sure they felt welcome here. It speaks about the rich diversity of people, it's hard to translate, the big, important teachings they bring. In all of our ceremonies, our belief is that diversity makes us rich. We think of our ceremonies as being poor if it doesn't have diversity. If we recognize everybody at our potlatch, I was told we're poor. We need to get out more and meet more people, engage more people and bring them to our community. This beautiful human being, we have connections through family. It's a lot of funny little connections. But our elders say we're sister tribes. Even though there's a big span of the country in between us, we still consider ourselves, our people, to be sisters, is how it was explained to me. And they've come out here many, many times over the last several thousand years, just because they wanted to see what was out here. And they ran all the way out here and then bumped into the water and stopped and hung out with us for a bit. It goes way, way back, that history. So this song was taught me by Khacha, and standing in front of a microphone, opening conferences, as you can imagine, not part of our tradition, not part of our history. But when people started to invite him, he said, people make decisions every day without knowing very much about Indigenous people. And he said he went every time he was invited. So when people made those decisions, they knew a little bit more about us. They paused just a second to consider how it may affect Indigenous people. And he said in his 90s, he would hate for that tradition to die with him. He would hate for that hospitality to die with him. So I'm honored to be invited here. I'm grateful to see our dear friend here as well. And this is the song Khacha sang to me, shared with me. He sat there with a cane, making sure I sang it properly the first time I learned this, and we had to sing it back to him. And he said, you get it right, because it's important that people feel welcome in this place, that they know that they belong here absolutely, and that we respect them. So this is that song. I won't sing in front of the microphone, it'll be too loud. Oh,
Okay, you guys can have a seat. I come from a different longhouse, so you've probably been to some longhouses over here. Where I'm from, we have longhouses as well. And normally when the ceremonies are done, you sit. Or ceremonies are performed, you have a seat. So, because there's a lot of talking and a lot of explaining and stuff like that. Opening any meeting, if you're in Haudenosaunee territory, is always done with the Ohunagaridekwa. And the Ohunagaridekwa is like a big welcoming address. I won't do the big welcoming address, but I'll give you the essence. The reason why we do these openings is to bring everybody's minds together. So to open your minds, bring them to the same place, and to be ready to communicate and to really hear and see each other for what you're trying to say. So in our way, the way I was raised, you might hear other Haudenosaunee people explain it differently, but the way I was raised, my mother taught me, we don't believe in a creator, we believe in creation. So creation is like a big dream catcher. We're all interconnected. the plants, the animals, the sky beings, the beings that come from the water, you know, the bugs, the trees, everything is all interconnected with human beings. And so we, you know, if one is hurting, it has a reverberating effect, right? So when we open up our meeting, we want to acknowledge that we wouldn't exist without the interconnectivity of all of those things that creation has given to us. So I would like to acknowledge, first I would like to acknowledge the land. We're on Squamish land, am I correct? Okay, good. We're on Squamish land, but I'd like to acknowledge the worms and all the bugs and all the things that go in the land that you're going to be coming soon now that planting season is starting. You'll be getting your hands in that land and you'll be working with those brothers and sisters to make the plants grow. I'd like to acknowledge all the birds, all of the flying brothers and sisters, and the trees and all the plants and all of the four-legged that walk the land. And I'd like to acknowledge all of the beautiful flying in here this morning. I got to see that beautiful ocean. You get to be reminded of those beautiful animals and our brothers and sisters that live in the waters. I'd like to acknowledge everything that lives in the air and the ancestors, the thunder beings, and all those things that are interconnected, because we believe that our ancestors are very close to us. They're always close. This is why we call on them for help. We call on them for guidance. And on a day like today, when we have hard issues to discuss, we call on their calm and their wisdom to be here with us in this room. And I would like to acknowledge all of you here for coming. And I'm not an expert at doing this, so I'm doing the best I can, but I'd like to acknowledge all of your families and the places you come from, and all of your ancestors, that you may bring their wisdom and their knowledge and their peace and their love into these discussions that we're going to have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Zal, for your opening, and thank you for a beautiful song that really highlights our diversity and how rich it is, and for the wonderful words bringing all of our minds together, Monique. So I want to start by introducing myself. I am Wafaa Barakat, a recent alumni from BCIT, and I work currently at BCIT Student Association as a Student Development Coordinator. Today is very important to me specifically as someone who has experienced discrimination throughout my entire life. Not being born in Canada to coming to Canada, I was either too white or of color. And thank you, Zal, for mentioning the tragedy, Islamophobic tragedy of New Zealand, where 49 of community members, our brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers, their life was taken away from them. And to a lot of people that I've met, racism seems to be something of the past, something that we've overcome. And I just looked at the most recent statistics. The FBI reports that hate crimes have increased by 17% from 2016 to 2017. And Canada is no better. It has actually increased for that period of time by 49%. And this is something that some of us are witnessing every day. And I want to move on to tell you a little bit about the format of the conversation that we're having today. So we have 4 wonderful guest speakers, Winnie Hornmiller, followed by Dr. Anat Henry, who's going to share with us their experiences. And then we're going to have some discussion at our tables where we're actually going to have conversations within our communities about these issues. We'll then bring the guest speakers to the front and have a conversation with them about these issues. And then we'll hear from 2 other guest speakers, Harold and Sonmin. And so as you see, we have a table right next to the door with resources for you. This is not an easy issue for everyone. Some people are going to be finding some of the things that we're going to mention very hard. And so there are resources for you if you choose to do so. We also have, as you can see, flip charts throughout the room. The conversation today is just going to be, we won't be able to cover everything. It's going to be a very big start for BCIT and our community. However, there are so many other questions that we couldn't discuss today. It would take us, 2-3 days to actually answer all these questions. So we've put up questions throughout the room. You can write on the flip charts your thoughts on the questions, or you can actually put at your tables, there's stickies and markers where you can actually write your notes on each question. There's also one that kind of a reflection and a commitment from what you're going to take today. So it is my honor to introduce our first guest speaker, Monique Hornmiller. Monique Hornmiller has overcome discrimination and trauma to emerge as one of North America's most inspiring activists and Olympians. From her iconic Time cover to her former role as National Inquiry into Missing, Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, she empowers our community to overcome adversity and helps us turn reconciliation, justice, healing, and dialogue into a cornerstone of our national institutions. For me, Monique is a woman of resilience, strength, and fearlessness. At the age of 14, she was stabbed when she stood in front of 8,000 soldiers fighting for her life, holding her little 4-year-old sister. She became the icon for the Oka crisis and didn't stop there. She moved on to become the first Okahog woman to win a gold medal in water polo. And today, she's an activist, a strong activist, seeked at big conferences talking to us about what it is to be Indigenous women in Canada. Welcome, I would love to welcome you.
I first have to correct that. Over the last 19 years since I went to the Olympics, it seems I've won a gold medal. I didn't win a medal. I came 5th. But in my community, because Indigenous female Olympians are so few and far between, they all say, it doesn't matter, you won a medal, you won a gold medal. So just like the Native world, the rep is growing, and thank you very much. I want to first introduce myself. Traditionally, my name is Monique Garakwinunta Onat Garagete Sunshine Hornmiller. I'm a Bear Clan woman from the Mohawk nations of Ganawage and Ohsweken. And my mom always told me, she says, make sure that you acknowledge the territories that you're on out there, and make sure that they know you're just visiting. Because Mohawk women, we tend to go around and cause a bit of trouble. So I'm here to, and it's great to see friends and people I know, and also new friends that I hope to make today in discussing things around diversity. So since I was 14 years old, I've been a motivational speaker. And I guess what you could say is what I've done my whole life is I've tried to translate knowledge from one community to the other. And what is my objective? My objective has always been to try and understand, to communicate what we feel as Indigenous people, or what I feel as Indigenous a person, as a woman who's gone through many things, but to do it in a way that people will hear me. You know, my mother, I come from a family that, if you know Corey Wilson, you know of her father. My mother is like his female equivalent, okay? So she was a Native rights activist in the 60s, and I want to tell a little bit of story about how women and people of that generation roll. So my mom's 79, and she was one of the first Native rights activists in this country. Her name is Continetta Horn. And she was asked by Concordia University to open up their Indigenous mental health conference. So she's like, what should I say? I'm like, just say whatever. You can say whatever you want, Mom, you're 79. And she went up there, and what she basically said to this whole room of people working in Indigenous mental health was, colonization is making us sick, and you guys are all making money off of that sickness. And it's an industry. And she basically said it like that, like no minced her words. And she says, when I was done my speech, everybody was quiet. They didn't even clap. And I was like, yeah, well, you kind of verbally punched them in the face. And I said, if I were to translate that, because I know, when we're talking about reconciliation, and we're talking about We're living in a time of an era of this word of reconciliation. Knowledge translation is really important. But I'm going to be honest with you. The dialogue, the narrative reconciliation is still very colonized. Because we have to express ourselves in a way that is politically correct, where people will hear us. And I said to her, I said, Mom, if you're talking about colonization, and what is the natural reaction? I mean, if you're a Muslim person and you saw what happened in New Zealand, what is your natural reaction to watching that happen to your community? You want to scream, you want to rage. That's a normal reaction to such atrocity. Well, as Indigenous people, the natural reaction that you want, you just kind of, when you hear about it, when you understand what's happened to your families and your people, is this rage. I said, but we're trying to express this and share our experiences of colonization in the era of reconciliation, but we have to do it in a way that is politically correct, that people will hear us. So you let a little bit out, you let a little bit of that information out so that people will hear you. And I do this with my story about Oka. I do this, I go into places where people, I know that I'm speaking to a room full of people that they've never even thought about Indigenous issues. And I know I get an incredible opportunity to open their minds and hearts to these issues. And so I try to make it a human issue. And I said to my mother, I said, Mom, I said, what you're trying to say is our mental health, because that rage and that trying to get that out, we aren't ever able to really express it. So then it exhibits itself as anxiety and depression, because you don't even know where that comes from. And so when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about feelings, we're talking about perceptions, we're talking about experiences, but we're also trying to talk about how do we communicate that with each other, and so that we will hear each other, that we will open our minds and our hearts to very, very hard conversations. And you know why for 25 years I've been speaking and telling my story about Oka, the most painful thing that's ever happened to me, is because I have hope and I have belief in this experiment called Canada. What we're trying to do in this country, create a country where it is a multicultural country, where no matter where you live, how you love, how you pray, how you dress, how you sexually identify, that you can live to your greatest capacity in peace. I'm going to tell you, and this may be a sad thing, but there's never been a country on this planet that has ever been able to do that. We are trying to create something that has never existed. This can be scary or this can be awesome. I choose this is an awesome opportunity. And why is diversity important? Why do we not want a country where everybody prays the same, loves the same, thinks the same? Well, I was on an Olympic team. And when you have an Olympic team of 13 women, you cannot have a carbon copy of 13 women who think the same, love the same, pray the same. Because if one player has a bad game, it's like a domino effect and everybody will fall. When one person has a bad game, you need to have 5 others stand up and have the strength. Wherever they get that strength, wherever they get that motivation, it comes from somewhere, but it's different. But the thing that works on Olympic teams and why it's so important to have conversations now is because in Olympics, I knew what my destination was. My destination was to win that game, to win that medal. And we had a game plan on how to do that. We're trying to create something that's never existed on this planet, but we don't really know what that looks like, and we don't have a game plan. How are we going to manage diversity in a time when we don't even understand that texting is not communicating? Tweeting is not communicating. Our young people are not learning to communicate face to face. And if you go to any longhouse or any ceremony across Indigenous countries or communities, you will find we're not a written culture. Like we didn't write things down. We talk to each other. And in our longhouse, the most important thing when you had a conflict was you needed to understand that other person's side so well that you could actually argue their perspective. You needed to listen. You needed to understand before a decision was made. So this is going to be the toughest part of Canada and being multicultural, is how are we going to step out of our ways of thinking and find that common humanity, and how are we going to be able to find ways to communicate? Well, places like BCIT, providing these opportunities to speak face to face, where you can't hide behind a screen, where the bravery and the compassion and the common humanity is how you look someone in the face and you tell them the honest truth, is the most important thing. And I opened up this with that ceremony because the most important lesson I ever learned as a Mohawk, well, my mother, and she's a Mohawk woman, she thinks there's nothing in this whole world that's better than being a Mohawk woman, okay? And generally if you meet a Mohawk woman, we all think the same. And it's because in our culture, we're matrilineal, right? We own the home, we own the kids, we own the fields and the farm. We can put chiefs up, we can take them down, we can declare war, we can call our warriors back. We have a lot of power, right? So my mom's like, there is nothing better than being a Mohawk woman. She says, but if I ever catch you putting down another race of people and calling it pride, I'm going to kick your butt. She says, before you are a Mohawk, you are a human being, and never, ever forget that. Because you will need to find a common humanity in life wherever you go. And if you want to become an Olympic athlete, don't think that you're going to make it only an all Olympic, Native Olympic team. I didn't see one other Native person almost my entire career. So if I always saw someone else as another race, another religion, another sexual orientation, and I held them like this, and I couldn't find my common humanity, you can be sure I would never have achieved my dream. So I'm really honored to be part of this discussion, and I hope that I can bring a little bit of my Haudenosaunee perspective, but I promise to leave after.
Thank you, Monique, for communicating with us how Indigenous women feel, the importance of diversity, and bringing hope to all of us. Next, we have our second guest speaker for today, Anat Henry, Dr. Anat Henry, who is a professor at the Department of Language and Literacy Education and is named the David Lamb Chair in Multicultural Education. She's cross-appointed to the Institution for Race, Gender, Sexuality, and Social Justice. And she spoke and written and researched extensively on these topics. And she is the recipient of the Canadian Association of University Teachers Equity Award for 2018. Welcome to Anat Henry.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here. I must confess, it's my first time at BCIT, which is a travesty, considering we're neighbors and really trying to do some of the same things. And I want to just thank the organizers. Thanks for the invitation, of course. And Winnie, thank you so much for your inspirational message and reminding us that we're all connected. And what I want to talk about is racism. My favorite topic and no one else's favorite topic. But really, I've been thinking a lot about racism in institutions of higher learning, like at colleges and universities, because that's where I work, and really how we live together and how we talk about racism, which is one of the hardest things to do. And so for the last few years at UBC, I've been really trying to coordinate events and discussions, sometimes in informal settings, such as department meetings and so forth. And one of the things that strikes me is that we have, when I say we, I mean this country generally, but we're not alone. This, I would say, it's a difficult topic. We have a hard time acknowledging the existence of racism in our midst. It's happening, it's happening at Langara, or it's happening at UBC or Simon Fraser. It's not happening here at all. And I think sometimes it's because we look at these things as like individual incidents rather than looking at things systemically. And so I think we have to realize that systemic racism is integral even to the founding of Canadian society and Canadian institutions. Timothy Stanley talks about the grand narrative that we have sort of cultivated that's carved out who belongs in the nation and who doesn't. And so there's an imagined community of who is a real Canadian, and stemming from the history of the white, French, and the English, the English and the French. And even the multicultural policy, I mean, I have a chair in multicultural education, but I tell people I'm an anti-multiculturalist because it really has erased Indigenous people completely, just like they weren't even around when this policy was being conceptualized. And it's kind of clumped everyone else into an amorphous clump of people. So I think that happens in universities and colleges as well. And so what I would like us to really think about is think about, for faculty and students, think about the curriculum that you teach or that you're learning. Think about the texts that are used in the classroom. And think about the perspectives that are espoused in the classroom. Think about the bibliographies that we give to students. Think about the people that we invite to speak, the people we hire. So all of those are ways in which we can say, okay, there seems to be an issue here. Is it that there are no, I was presenting last week in the UK, and I showed a chart of the leadership in what is called the U15 universities in Canada. So it's 15 universities, and there wasn't one Indigenous woman in leadership from the dean level up. There were a couple of Indigenous men, and there were mostly visible minority men, if there were visible minorities. And the term itself even is one could say, problematic, because that's an issue in Canada. We don't collect enough data, and I'm really wondering, and Carl James said this the other day at Simon Fraser when he was visiting, what is it that we don't want to know? Why we don't tease apart the data? So if I'm looking at this piece of data that says, well, okay, I'll just give you an example of UBC, for example, since none of them are here. So for example, when they say they hired 16 visible minorities, you don't know what that really means. They've done a lot of recruiting in the sciences abroad, and we just, because we have this, I don't know what to call it, I wouldn't want to call it blackdar. It's like gaydar, but black, you know what I mean? So we kind of know who's been hired. So we know that it's like one poet was hired, one black male poet. So you don't really know. The data looks like we're doing so much, but there may be faculties where year after year after year after year, nobody's hired, right? So I think that's how we can see that these things are systemic, and in a way we can say, that people don't like the term white supremacy, but we can say this is basically an example of white supremacy. Are you telling me across this country that there could not be, so-called visible minority women that could be a university president, for example? So I think those are the kinds of things that are really interesting for me to look at. And also thinking about our student body. I don't know what the student body of BCIT is. Thank you. Was that 2 minutes or a peace sign? Oh, okay, thank you. Just checking. I know we're all about love here, so to you too. And so anti-racist education really is an act of love. It has to be. It really has to be, and I think we have to go forward with that kind of posture, with that kind of attitude that we're doing this out of love and not to create and stir up problems and issues. So I think I've pretty much said what I need to say, and I look forward to the discussions that we're going to have. And again, thank you for inviting me. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. What I learned there is, our institutions, we need to challenge the norms within our institutions and within our communities, and really think deeply about what we currently have and if it is currently diverse. So we're going to move on to a discussion questions within your team. And so within your groups, if we can start discussing our first discussion question, and it is, how does race and racial discrimination shows up for people in their day-to-day lived experiences at work and learning environments? What do we see and what not see? And what are these experiences rooted in? Just leading into what Dr. Henry shared with us today. So we will have 10 to 15 minutes within our groups to discuss this question.
I wasn't sure what my job was, so I thought I was supposed to circulate to different tables. So I stayed here for a little bit and went to another table. We talked somewhat about student demographics and whether or not to include, what that means to include student data or to collect student data, and some of the issues around that. For example, one of the arguments has been, well, it might be misused. That's the argument against collecting data. And we talked about the way in which systemically colonialism and white supremacy pervade these things. And the issue of who gets pushed out, who gets retained came up, and the issue of intersectionality, and that is very prevalent in terms of data in trying to find things out, but also in thinking about this issue of, I don't think this word was used in the group, but I'll use it, inclusion, because I'm thinking a lot about that, in fact, in terms of, but there's a way in which we meaning systemically, we want people to fit in rather than be themselves. And but in fact, that came up at another table, is in terms of the issue of Canadian experience. Some jobs, maybe not so much here at BCIT, and in the kinds of institutions we're in, we welcome, to some degree, international experience or experience from elsewhere. But there's a way in which we're asked to fit in. So inclusion sometimes is like including into a particular tradition that has come from way back. So whether it's the RCMP or the universities can be pretty, what counts as tenure, what counts as good teaching, and so forth. So I think one big takeaway was just opening the doors to people is not enough. And it's, so I don't know if I just said this or not, but in terms of the issue of Canadian experience, this must have happened to you, but I get into taxis all the time and talk with the taxi driver, and we'll start talking about, Canadian experience and why he's driving a taxi when he could be an engineer, or he has to pass an exam to get the job that he was doing back in another country. So I think these are real issues in terms of how we're set up here.
You have a response to that? I just wanted to add on to what you were saying, because we were also having just a conversation more so about how racism shows up systemically, and whether or not, we can feel like as individual professors or individual students that, there can be like some accommodations made, or certain teachers may have like a stronger orientation to talking about racism. But when you were talking about just that expectation of fitting in a certain way, or, what is considered good teaching, I was just thinking about also my experience as a student being in a classroom where, let's say like the topic for that week is racism, right? And sometimes I have white professors who are teaching that. They're the teacher for that course, so they're teaching that topic. And, you're sitting in the classroom of mostly people of color students, right? And there's still a very one way that teaching happens, which is I have a specific agenda and materials as to what I'm gonna teach about this topic today. Right? So I've had a very recent experience where I really wanted to, challenge and push my professor a little bit. It's like, well, I'm not sure, really what you're saying about this particular way, racism happens. I don't know if it actually looks like that, right? And often teachers want to address very overt ways that racism happens and not willing to actually hear from students as to how does this show up in your life, like we're talking about right now. And I feel that we would be able to offer so much insight and knowledge about how it can be addressed, but because it's not an interaction, right? And I think that as a person of color or students of color, you get really good at reading your professor's body language. You really feel it when they don't want to talk about it, or they only want to talk about it in their way, and they don't want to engage or be pushed in that, right? So I think even challenging around how we talk about, how we teach, these topics is like, how do we invite as much lived experience as possible? Because I really feel like there are so many answers there, but they have to be open-minded. They have to be willing to actually hear that and to be told that, you may not know everything about racism, even though you probably read a lot about it in books.
So on our table, we are talked about two main things. So how do people perceive racism in their daily lives? So one of the ways we're discussing is generalization. And this comes in many contexts. Like one of the examples that was given is that when comments are being made, for example, regarding specific behavior, so we do have a tendency of going ahead and actually labeling the entire group, like using stereotypes and that kind of things. And when these generalizations are being used, what's happening is that certain groups of people, they end up feeling marginalized. They can't participate in that discussion because, you are feeling like you're not part of it, right? You are part of the problem, right? And this is one significant way where people perceive it in a day-to-day life. The other thing we talk about is actually being aware of racism. And this is from both sides. So sometimes we talk about white people not being able to perceive racism, and that's why maybe they're living in a certain bubble, and that's why they don't get it. But it also happens on the other side as well. For minority groups, you may not be able to perceive that just because you haven't seen the differences, right? So you have some of the racism which is quite subtle, and when you're being subjected to this kind of racism, you don't really know because you think, well, this is how people behave, right? Until when you start mixing with other groups and comparing notes, that's when you start realizing that, okay, maybe here I'm being treated in a different way, right?
And I just wanted to add to that, like we talked a little bit differently. We talked about racism from a personal, I think for a lot of Indigenous people that work in institutions, and I'm going to paraphrase, but I hope I do it properly, is tired of being angry, tired of being hurt, tired of being generalized, tired of seeing students go through it. It's emotional, and it's very, it's super draining, right? And we talked about a little bit about that and how that it's hard, and as you see it happen over and over again, you sometimes lose hope, right? That things are changing. We also talked about at our table about how do you speak to people, you know, like white people. Like I remember having an experience on my Olympic team where I was challenging that the elite sports system is racist. There's racism. There's discrimination. I mean, if you're an athlete, I mean, it really is. It's sexist. It's everything. There's so many things in it. And I was trying to point this out to my team in an instant, and automatically, I had 12 girls that I played with for years go, I'm not racist. I'm not racist. They take it personally. And so you can't even talk about, so you end up like, oh, doubling back, going, no, you're not racist, but you've benefited from a system that is racist, right? Like, I'm not saying you're a bad person, but you have had a leg up on a lot of other people. And that's what we're trying to get people to understand, is that you personally, we're not calling you out as a bad person, but the system has enabled you to get further ahead, easier. You haven't had to question a lot of things that were constantly being questioned, whether your daughter is a cheater because she's Native, right, in tests, or all these things that the day in, day out of talking your kids or people through systems that are set up to be racist. And so I think we have to make a really strong differentiation and get that conversation. We're never going to have that conversation if people automatically go, oh, I'm racist. You're saying I'm racist. I don't want to hear about it. I've never done anything to you. That's another thing. I've never done anything to anybody, and I don't see race. If I hear I don't see race again, I'm going to kill somebody. Because that's not like a peace, love, and John Lennon way of looking at things, right? It's like, no, how can you not? You're not seeing me. You're not seeing my experience, right? So these are things that we have to teach at a very young age, that peace, not seeing race does not equal being peaceful. You need to see people for who they are, right? But also, and that has to start at a very young age, but sometimes it's the first places you're going to get it is in a university or college setting.
Thank you so much to our guest speakers, so you can rejoin your tables. Thank you. And you can stay. I just wanted to share a personal experience on racism at BCIT. It's quite a funny one. I was waiting in front of a class with my professor, just waiting to enter the class, and just wanted to create some small talk. So he just looks at me and he goes, so how many kids do you have? None. Are you married? No. So where did you grow up? Like, really wanted to change the subject after each question, and it just got worse. So where did you grow up? Toronto. So it's things like that, and that, you know, really in our minds trigger, you know, all these stereotypes that are happening in our community. By the way, I love that instructor. So now I want to introduce our guest speaker, who we've already heard from, Harold Shababi. He is the software development manager at Amazon and has an educational and a research background in computer science from universities in Germany. And he is, once he moved to Canada, he worked in military defense and application engineering, and moved on to found 2 startups in financial services and retail logistics, and currently works as for Amazon in transportation space. Besides industry experience, he has worked. He was a professor at Akan University, and most recently an instructor at BCIT. Please join me in welcoming Harold. Thank you. If you'd like to sit.
May I remain seated?
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wafaa, for that welcoming speech. I want to share a little bit of my personal experiences as well as touching on the two topics we're talking about, generalization and not being aware of racism. These are things that I've experienced myself in different ways. So one of the puzzling things is that over the years, okay, moved to Canada now, been living in Canada now for about 12 years. So one of the recurring themes that I've been hearing over the many years is that when people ask me, how do you perceive racism at workplace, in education in Canada, my response has always been that, well, there isn't none. I haven't seen anything, right? And people were telling me their stories about, how they experience discrimination, and I was always surprised. So I started asking myself, okay, why don't I see these things? And I think it's related to these two things, generalization and not being aware of differences. So from my background, before coming to Canada, I was experiencing the direct kind of racism, where somebody's actually speaking to you directly. It's not about a group, it's about you as an individual, right? You will be told direct reason as to maybe why you cannot graduate, why you cannot get this job. And the reason is always attached to that is that, well, you can't do this job because you're black. Okay? You can't do this because you're a woman, right? So growing up in that kind of a culture, right? And so that's how I have been perceiving racism pretty much growing up. So moving here then is that many things that are happening are quite subtle, right? So you don't actually experience that one in such a direct way. And because of that one, I have been blind pretty much to this subtle kind of racism that's going on, right? So one of the examples that I've given before, we were discussing on our table, is that, okay, so why don't some people experience this one? And one of the participants has mentioned an example is that they were together with somebody else, and that somebody was experiencing racism in a supermarket, right? But she never really understood that herself. It was only until she pointed out that she understood, right? So where am I going with this one? Is that the biggest thing that we need to do here to be able to move this conversation forward is to actually start having this dialogue. And I'm quite thankful for the organizers to do this because it's opening up eyes to different kind of things that's happening. So sometimes when you go ahead and generalize, you may not realize that you're doing that you're hurting certain people, right? And sometimes when you see this happening to other people and you don't say, you don't point it out, even though that person may not actually perceive that as being a discrimination, you're not helping. You should speak out, you should help in making sure that other people understand the difference that they're happening to them and they can actually react to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. Yep. So now we will call on our fourth and last speaker, Sonmin Bang. She is a volunteer and educational outreach coordinator at WAVAW Rape Crisis Center. She is a first-generation Korean immigrant of color and a queer feminist. She studied, completed her BA in legal studies and women's studies in the University of Waterloo, and when she relocated to BC, she joined the WAVAW Rape Crisis Center, where she develops and delivers workshops on sexual violence and its intersections. She's also previously the host and producer of the intersectional feminist radio show, The F Word. She shares the belief with many anti-racist activists that the path to ending violence and racism is revolutionary love. Please join me in welcoming Sonmin.
Hi, everyone. I've been debating whether or not I should sit down or I should stand up or I should sit down or I should stand up. So I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to go with the format, just stand here, and hopefully I can talk to all of you. I just want to say I feel really humbled and I feel really honored to be here. And I'm excited, you know, like Annette, my favorite topic is racism. Not everyone's favorite topic, though. So just, you know, coming here, as Wafaa was just introducing me, my orientation to this particular work also comes from my identification with feminism. So I'm a queer feminist of color, and I want to not only remember all of my direct ancestors who have also brought me to this place, but my anti-racist, feminist, women of color ancestors who have also done so much incredible work for me to stand on their shoulders and speak in front of all of you. So thank you for that. And it's going to be hard for me to talk within 5 minutes because I'm like the kind of girl who's like, do you have 4 minutes, 4 hours? I might be able to convince you to start a revolution with me. So I'm going to try to just really stay a little bit more like in my heart rather than in my head to share a personal story. So often when I teach a workshop about racism and white supremacy, I share with people that the first white supremacists that I met were my parents. And just like this, people are like, huh, what? What do you want to say about that? So I have, you know, my parents were Korean. I was I was not born in Korea, but I was raised in Korea. And my parents were, they were international students back in the 80s in Germany. So when, you know, we were moving to Canada and I was going to school as a high school student, this is my 13th year in Canada, you know, my parents often really implicitly and explicitly told me that, you know, like, just act like white people. Just befriend them, talk to them, act like them, like do whatever they're doing. And, you know, again, like explicitly, implicitly would say things like, white people just are better than us. That's a hard one to say, even out loud. But, you know, so it was always challenging, but I knew that, you know, my parents really saw that in order for me to succeed in Canada and to be accepted and to be welcomed meant that, you know, yeah, maybe I don't look white, but maybe my demeanors and manners could get me, you know, get me by a little bit easier. And they were not wrong. They were pretty accurate about that. And because of their own experiences with racism when they were international students in Germany, it was so clear to them that, you know, sometimes you just want to like sort of stay under the radar, you know, act like them, and then it will all be okay. Meanwhile, of course, you know, I got the message, like, don't ever forget you're Korean. Don't you ever forget. Right, so some confusing messages about that. But the reason I shared and actually pretty explicitly call that my parents were white supremacists, the first white supremacists that I met, you know, is that, and then I'm so glad that in our sort of discussion, it came about that there's this idea that to call someone a racist is like a terrible, terrible word. Like it's like a moral, you know, statement about somebody. And I really feel like we need to just break out of that, right? Like whether you are a person of color or you're a white person, we're all very much socialized in a racist, like capitalist, patriarchal society. So we all have that orientation. But when you are a white person, it's like that is what you know, that is what you've been taught about, and it's not your fault, right? But when we are so stuck in this good, bad binary, how, you know, just to be like a not racist is like the biggest accomplishment. Either way, we just need to be a little bit more comfortable with being really uncomfortable. And I know that a lot of people talk about that. But I know that even from my experience, building that racial trust with across different racial identities and I feel that how we can build that racial trust is, for white people to really just not worry about whether they're going to be called racist or not. And then if you are called that, it's not the end of the world. And you're going to be able to find different ways and different paths of action. But we need to get a little bit more comfortable and have those difficult conversations. And really, even if you don't know other people's experiences, try to get closer to them. And the only way we can do that, I feel, is to just break out of that binary and get closer, get past our white fragility a little bit, and for really a lot of also people of color activists to get more comfortable with being settlers and what that means. So again, I am really terrible at talking for 5 to 7 minutes, but I hope that we can have further conversations, and thank you.
Thank you, Sonmin, for sharing your wonderful story with us. And so I just wanted to note, we're going to be moving on to our next discussion question. But I have a note here from the organizers inviting you to have more food. And we have bannock that just arrived on the other side. Delicious bannock. Yeah. It's delicious. I come to diversity circles for them. No, I'm just kidding. So our next question is, why do we need to talk about race and racial discrimination, even if it is difficult? And for the guest speakers, you're welcome to stay at your table or move around to other tables as you see fit. And we're just going to be discussing that for 10 to 15 minutes. Our guest speakers, if you could share with us what you've discussed at your tables. Thank you. Who wants to start?
Can I get us started? Is that okay?
Of course.
I was preparing for this event, and I was like, this question. And I feel like it's really answering the question. I think that it's important for us to talk about it because it's difficult, because it's really hard, and because it's really uncomfortable, right? And even at our table, we were talking about how hard it feels and difficult it feels to maybe take that first step, right? And I was just thinking, I was sharing with folks at our table that I really feel like talking about race and racism is like using a muscle. I really see it as that. And so even earlier when I was talking about building that racial trust and to be able to bring people together and to have conversations, it's like we got to keep doing it. Otherwise, it's not going to get any easier. And I really see just that the value in that, and not, the less we're willing to engage in these conversations, the more it's gonna get. So we just gotta, bring that eagerness to the table and to be like, you know what, I know I'm gonna screw up. I know I'm not gonna be perfect. I know I have all of my internalized biases and things that I don't see, but I'm ready. I'm ready to use that muscle.
We spoke at both the tables. We had this talk about why racism and why we need to have these conversations. And I played back on this little, vignette I saw on Facebook right after Trump was elected. And everybody was reeling, how the heck did he get elected, right? And this guy was going off and he said, it's the left. The left is the one that helped this guy get elected. Why? Because anytime someone had a difference of opinion, they'd be shut down. you're racist, you're sexist, you're ageist, you're this, you're homophobic, and before they could even express what they were trying to say, or if maybe they were saying something really racist, or maybe they were talking about a concern, they were shut down, they were fired, right? And there was an actual polling done right before the election of who would you vote for, and I mean, it didn't look like Trump was gonna win. And then all these people voted in quiet, in secret, right? Because they didn't want to say, well, you know what? I am worried about jobs and all these people coming here, and I don't know how to talk about it, and I'm not in, like, real world issues that there's no place to discuss them. And now you see on campuses across the country, when controversial figures are invited to speak, there's protests, and they shut them down. And, you know, Brock, Ryerson, McGill, Concordia, you know, places where you think, okay, this is the place to have these conversations. Bring these people, get your best debaters, get all those professors that are busy writing and get them debating, and do it in a format where all the students have to see it. Bring these people out of the dark, because that's where racism flourishes. It grows. It's like a cancer, and it functions in the dark. And someone who's very middle ground, who might be, you know, I'm not racist, but I'm not concerned about these issues. I'm kind of concerned about jobs and where I'm going to live and all this kind of stuff. All they need is someone in their ear, or they may need to read a few things on the internet, and the next thing you know, they're like, yeah, well, those black people can be proud of themselves, and those Muslims can be proud of themselves. Why can't I be proud of being white? And the next thing you know, they're getting Proud Boys tattooed on them, or white, you know what I mean? It doesn't take much to push someone in that direction. So we need to keep those people in the light, and we need to debate them, and these need public forums where these thinkers are debated. And we also talked at the other table about how it is a very hard conversation and perception. If you walk in and everybody's coming with their own baggage, their own way in which they see the world, and it's all been formatted by their experiences. So that's why it's interesting, because in Indigenous cultures, in our culture, we have something called the small condolence ceremony. If you're about to have a really hard conversation with somebody, you do the small condolence ceremony so that they know, okay, we're about to have a hard conversation, but essentially, I love you as a human being. Let's find peace. We need to find peace together. So let's say the hard stuff that needs to get said. So I think if we are going to have these conversations, we might need to have some help on how to do that. And I know that each culture and each religion has ways in which you can support these conversations. And I think bringing your diversity, bringing your A game to these conversations from all different cultures is going to be really important.
So we addressed both questions. So the first one is, why is it important to talk about these things? And one theme is opportunity. So when you're talking about this experiment we're calling Canada, you spoke about us not having a blueprint or game plan, how to get there, right? And the discussion we had was that, yes, even though we don't have that, we're actually quite lucky in Canada that we can actually have an open dialogue. And this is an opportunity, not just for Canada, but for the rest of the world. Because if we can go out and talk about these things, then we are creating that blueprint, that game plan, that hopefully is going to shine the light the rest of the world so that we can fix these issues. And the other thing is about being brave, right? When we don't talk about these things, then we don't break the norms. And being brave is from both sides, right? These are really hard questions, like everybody understands. And sometimes we don't talk about those things because of fear, okay? When you think about small groups of minority, or try to imagine you are the only minority, right, who is in a larger group. In many cases, you are under extreme pressure to blend in, right? You don't want to be perceived as the person who is different. And speaking out in such an environment basically is pointing out to the problem, right? So yeah, we can argue, can say that, yeah, hiding it, try to blend in is not the right way to fix it. But if you are there, you're fighting, this is really your first instinct, as you were saying as well, like, okay, try to behave like other people. right? And so how can we fix that one? Is by forming allies. So we were discussing this table, that one way of encouraging other people to speak is just by creating this allies, so that if somebody stands out and speak about something, it should not be pointed back to them that, yeah, of course, you're going to say that because you're so-and-so, which pretty much reinforces the stereotypes. So if we can stand up for other people when they have issues, if we can stand up even when they cannot do it for themselves, then we're encouraging everybody to start having these difficult conversations.
Thank you. I'm smiling because I sometimes try to make sure that I don't blend in. So I will ask myself, are my earrings big enough today? You know, things like that. You know, maybe I'll wear a head wrap today. I just want to really make it clear who I am. So I guess so many great things that the group I sat with talked about. And one thing they talked about, which was really important, is you know, we need to talk about race more and more, because it's not monolithic. It's not, you know, I'm black and you're white, or, you know, I'm indigenous and, you know, you're German or something. There's so many variegations. There's so many different ways to be anything, to be, you know, indigenous or black, or you know, especially in this society, we have more and more mixed race people. And what does that mean? And how do we perceive people? How do they identify? How do we allow them to be who they are? And so I think the more we talk about these things, the more we can really see that it's actually much more complicated and complex than we make it very often. So I thought that was a great point that they brought out. And also it kind of reduces or takes away that binary of black, white, or even, you know, you were saying Korean white or whatever, you know, because we just have so many identities within us. So I think that's one of the reasons, and to see how race really intersects with other identities. And we talked a lot about, you know, the idea of calling someone racist, which actually I never would do. I would never call anybody racist, even if they were. I would never do that, because that's like a recoil. So I might say that comment is racist, or you need to think about that comment. It's blah blah blah. But it's just that it's just too much work to get them back into a situation of talking again. So now I wrote an article which I knew would cause problems. The editor had said to me, I think Dear White People had just come out, and so she said, I really like Dear White People. Why don't you just say, and she wanted it to be like 6 words, you know how these sort of, and so Dear White People, Canada is racist. Okay, so I knew there'd be some backlash. So of course there was, and so it was from the conversation.ca, and so of course there was, and she ended up pulling off a lot of the readers' comments because, you know, that was just too much. But I was kind of calling Canada and the system and showing how the system is racist. So I think it's really, language is so important, and that's how one of the ways we communicate, not the only way. So because very often, as I think many of you said, and you've said in your small groups, people hear that you're calling them racist when you're not. When you say this textbook is racist, they hear you calling them racist and you're not. So we have to be really careful, but that doesn't mean hiding, you know, not actually getting at the crux of what you really need to say and want to say. And so in the group I was in, somebody talked about, you know, when you're racist, being a racist doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's just that this comment or something was racist. And I actually thought about this theologian. Her name is, she just goes by one name, Tandaka. And she's, she's still at the University of Chicago. She's just a beautiful woman. And she wrote an article and talked about how that happens. As a child, you might say, you know, Mommy, look at the black woman, or look at the brown woman. and the mother might shame the child, say, no, don't say that. So then you get the feeling that, oh, I'm not supposed to say that, right? Which I thought was actually interesting, because I've had that experience as growing up. That somebody said, you know, Mommy, look at this or that. But I had a lovely experience where, and this mother knew what she was doing with her maybe 3-year-old. I was in a shop when I lived in Tacoma, and the little girl said, Mommy, Mommy, look at the brown lady. And the mother said, oh yes, isn't she beautiful? I thought, wow, that mother knows what she's doing, because I'm not beautiful, but she knows what she's doing. I just was so moved by that, because she was really instilling in that little girl that all colors are very beautiful. So I think, you know, as we said earlier, that it starts very, very young. My group had a great example, and do you know the name of the article at all? Did you find it?
Yes, so the article is on nonprofitaf.com, and it's called Hey, You Got a Little Racism Stuck in Your Teeth.
Oh, yes, I might have read
And
that.
it's
Okay,
actually
yeah.
amplifying the voice of Jay Smooth, who did a TEDx talk, Hampshire College. So that nonprofitaf.com, hey, you got a little racism stuck in your teeth. And it's Jay Smooth, it's referring to Jay Smooth's TED Talk. So you can look at nonprofitaf.com and look at that article, and it has the Jay Smooth YouTube in it.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. So the analogy was like, if somebody it's like dental hygiene. You have to do that every day, hopefully. And you know, there are times you fall asleep. Come on. And you wake up in the middle of the night and you say, should I brush? And so, but, so it's like dental hygiene. You have to do it every day. And if somebody has say a bit of spinach in their teeth, you wouldn't sort of shout across the room. You'd say, excuse me, you know, you have a bit of spinach in your teeth. You would take them aside, let them know, and the person would say, oh, thanks a lot. I was just going to be on the panel. I appreciate that, you know. And so, and that's why I didn't eat my lettuce, as you see. So really, I thought that was just a beautiful example, and thank you very much, because you know, we have to do that every day. We have to think about and just do a little bit of kind of racial hygiene, if you like, and think about.
No.
Yeah, I just realized what I said. I know. Yeah. Flossing. Yeah, do a little bit of flossing of all kinds, yes. And so, I thought that sounded a little odd, but so it took a while to click in. Please, I hope this isn't being recorded. Just blur the face or something. Anyway, I think I've said more than enough.
So I know that you had something else to add to that. So we do have a 2-minute closing remark for each of the speakers to tell us a little bit about today and what it means to them again, and if there is an action that each person in this room can take to solve some of the issues that we've discussed today, if you can think of any. Yep, we'll start with
Okay. I'll try to cram all of my responding and closing thoughts in this. But I was just, and I thought that it was brilliant that you shared that example about, you know, kids learning racism from such an early age. And, you know, I don't know if a lot of people have read or seen the book White Fragility and Why It's Really Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. And she talks about how actually white kids, they don't unlearn racism by being told, like, don't talk about that, or don't, like, name somebody's, or point out somebody's black or brown, right? That actually what happens is that they learn how to hide their biases very successfully over time, right? So it's important to also think about why we need to engage in those conversations from such an early age. And I thought it was so interesting that you shared that you never call anyone a racist. And I thought that was funny because my partner is white and I call him racist on a regular basis. On purpose. And because not only, like, just because he's like with me, that does not mean that he is not racist. It comes up regularly. It comes up in my interactions with his parents regularly. So to me, it's like, I don't want you to recoil when someone else tells you that you're being racist. I want you to get real comfortable with being called or, you know, pointed out just how your actions or words that you say can have real impact, right? So yeah, I thought that was such an interesting strategy, and we have to have multiple strategies, right? So I believe that. And I think just one of the things that I want to maybe leave, you know, I really appreciate just also how many white folks are in this room and being part of this discussion, because I always feel like whenever we talk about racism, we're talking to the people who get it. You know, but what I wanted to say is that, you know, as we are talking about how important it is that we get comfortable with talking about it, and so one thing that I want to leave for like white students, staff, instructors, you know, whatever your role may be, is that instead of always asking like, how does this affect you, person of color? Tell me about why it's hard for you. I find that it actually builds a bit more racial trust when, you know, white people can come to that table with, here's how I really see I benefit from this particular system of oppression, and here's how I see play out and how I may be complicit. That actually makes it so that, you know, other people of color at the table also feel like they can like, just like, you know, like we don't have to have such like raised shoulders all the time. That's how I feel like when we talk about racism, is like my shoulders just go up, right? So just so we can like, again, like have that conversation in a more, you know, trust building way. And I feel that one way to do that is to really examine and to feel comfortable talking about how you implicitly, explicitly benefit from racism. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no. I think I would just say that that learning about anything is a process, and so I teach teachers, and I'm always telling them that it's a process. You go into that classroom, even though you might have taken the teacher education program at UBC, you go in the classroom and you're terrified, like, what do I know? And I think it's the same thing. We have to keep working at this, and there'll always be situations in which you think, oh, you know, I didn't do the right thing, or I didn't know what to do, I didn't know what to say. But it's a process. And the other thing that I just want to emphasize again is thinking systemically. You know, it's not just the incidents that happen, or sometimes we chalk them up to, oh, that was just unfortunate, or that was just a kind of an anomaly. But to kind of look at things systemically and say, now, is there a pattern here? She's been working in that office for 5 years, and everyone else has had a promotion. What's going on here? And is there something I can do about that? So I think both are important to see how we are implicated sometimes in actual acts of racism, but also thinking, how can we improve the institution we work in? What kinds of things can I do? Or are there people that I can talk to about how to make UBC or BCIT a better place?
Well, I always come at these sort of ideas and these concepts from, I'm a mother of 3. So my kids, I have a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And my kids are mixed race. So I have, my husband is like, I always call him an alpha white male, right? He's from Alberta. He's a 4-time Olympian in judo. So we met at the Olympics. And he's a doctor. and he's heterosexual, obviously, because he's with me, and I use him as my barometer, right? Of like, he's my white guy thermometer on how people see the world. And we have these hard conversations because he's lived in my community, and being white in a Mohawk community is not fun, okay? So I have to give him that. 8 years he lived in my community, and we fought my community on it. I think when we talk about racism and we talk about trying to create a place, I close my eyes and I think of my children, and I think of the world I want them to inherit. And I think I go back to my teachings of my people. And we ultimately are always trying to find our way back to the great peace, the great tree of peace, and living together. And if you talk to elders and you talk to the elders, they talk about the prophecies. And it doesn't matter if you're a Mohawk or if you're Lakota or if you're Navajo or if you're on the other side of the world. We're talking about a time on this planet where it's becoming less about race and it's becoming about human survival. How are we going to do this? The planet, all these things. And, you know, so I think about my children and I think about what I went through, but I also think about my mother went through. And when I'm an old lady, and my grandkids look at me and they say, Mom, what did you do to make this world better? I want to know that I did every possible thing to make it better. And that includes taking my own community to task on issues. I sued my community and I won. I took them to court over a ban on mixed race marriages. And so, yes, it's not sexy. It was hard. I took a ton of flack from my community. Horrible, horrible lateral violence. But I said, you know what, if I'm going to ask Canadians to go through the process of reconciliation, if I'm going to ask them to look at the awful history of this country and what it did to my people, I need to look at what's going on in my own community for what it is. Not, yes, I can say, yes, it's because of colonization and there's a reason behind it. I said, but the only way that we're going to overcome these issues in my community is if we take ownership over our actions. Because once you know you own your actions, you can do something about your actions. I believe in that because I'm an athlete. And I owned my body. I knew what I could have control over. And I know this is not a popular discussion among Indigenous people, but I'm, you know, having worked with the National Inquiry, having worked in so many areas, I think that's going to be the hardest process, is go to your communities and talk to them about racism and how are we going to deal with those issues in our own backyards, in our own families, and then what are our kids, what is the world what world are they going to inherit from us? And is there going to be one? That's the question I always ask myself. That terrifying feeling of like, what's happening out there? And what are we going to do about it? And in the end, we're human and we have to find that common humanity or we're in big, big trouble. So this is a way through. I believe that we're going through this hard rebirthing process of having hard conversation and we're going to go to that other side. I believe in it because my ancestors and the prophecies tell us that that's where we're going. And so I sundance in the summer to pray for all humanity. I go to ceremonies in my community. I do all the things I can to try to move in that direction. And I sundance every summer in the Black Hills with a whole lot of non-Native people, Black people, Native people. And let me tell you, when you're thirsty and you're hungry for 4 days, you suddenly stop seeing someone as another color. You're like, you're thirsty, I'm thirsty. It's really humbling. But if we could find, and that's 4 days where I suddenly stop seeing people and you're on a very human level. So I urge you all to seek out those instances where you can find, whether it's through ceremony, whether it's through something you do, and you can find that common humanity and you can give to that positive energy that's in this world that our kids need. My children need it. Our children need this. They need us to do this hard work. And so I encourage you all to do that.
Yeah, did you ask me to provide a solution for discrimination? I think that's what she said. I did not sign up for this one because it's a tough problem, right? And anyway, as closing thoughts, I'm going to echo what has been said in multiple tables and what you guys mentioned already, which is talking about these things and not shutting other people down. To give a bit of perspective to that, I have a very good friend of 15 years, I think. And just to say what you said, not to call them racist, but I would just say outright, like he's one of those person, right? And many times when we are together with other people, he would say like really horrible things. And some of my other friends would ask me, why are you friends with this particular individual, right? He always speaks about these horrible things. He always behaves in a very strange way. Remember like one time we invited him over. He doesn't live in Canada. And we went to Toronto, walking the streets, and with another friend of mine. And his biggest complaint was that, why does Canada allow people to wear headscarves? He was complaining about, why do I see Chinese signs in the streets, right? And he would say these things out aloud, and it would offend a lot of people, right? And would say, oh, he's your friend. And say, yes, he's my friend. But the reason I'm hanging up to him is because, yes, I want him to learn, okay? I let him speak. I let him voice his opinions. I don't want him to go and do these things in the background, as you were saying. And when he's doing these things, I'm trying to correct. So I will admit I haven't been super successful over the last 15 years, but I'm seeing changes. And for example, I remember one of the changes was that I was visiting him one time, and he invited me to dinner to his parents, and I wanted to use the bathroom, right? And so when I asked to use the bathroom, his mom basically said, can you escort him to the bathroom because I don't know how to use a toilet. And he's the one who stood up and said, Mom, that is racist. Yeah. So I haven't been 100% successful, but talking to him, working with him over the years, I do see some changes. And I think this is something that we should take away, right? Not isolate people that we think do not conform. Be their friends, talk to them, hear them out, don't shut them off.
So thank you so much to our guest speakers. On behalf of everyone in this room, I know a lot of us are going to leave today with a little bit more about racism than we walked in. So thank you so much. If we can get a strong hand of applause for all of our guest speakers.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just meant to say this during my 2 minutes and I forgot. I'm just going to plug an event. Patricia Hill Collins is coming to UBC on the 11th, public lecture at 6 o'clock in the Student Union Center. I have a little bit of information on my Facebook page and I'm making a flyer right now. So all welcome. She's going to be talking about Black feminism and anti-Black racism. So you're all welcome. And please spread the word. Thank you.
All right. So thank you. And I just want to bring to the stage Annabelle and Nadia for closing remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for staying a little bit over time. Nadia and I will be very brief, but we just wanted to finish up. Before we finish, I first want to thank Wafaa. Where did Wafaa disappear to? If Wafaa... We'd just like to express our gratitude to Wafaa for being our moderator today. And I personally want to acknowledge all the work and efforts and leadership that Wafaa has shown, both at her time as a student here and also in her current role and her partnership with Diversity Circles.
Thank you so much.
I also just want to finish off by encouraging all of you to be part of this conversation. I was really excited to be part of this partnership with Diversity Circles and continue this work between BCIT, the FSA, as well as the Student Association. We toyed with the idea of, do we want to have a Q&A at the end of this event, as many events sort of finish off with that type of format, but we decided we didn't want to do that because we want to say and hope that this is the part or start of a conversation here at BCIT. Personally, I'm soon to fly across the ocean and go back, as I think Zah said, down under, back to Australia, to where my heart has always been and where I'm going back to my family. But I really want to say to the BCIT community, I hope you are bold and brave in these conversations. I think we are a wonderful community, but we can be better and we can be more inclusive. So I really challenge you to do that and be part of this as a shared responsibility and continue the conversation. And I look forward to hearing more about how that conversation goes from down under.
I just want to, And just to take a moment to really thank you for participating in the day. It's very important. We understand the historical importance of this date, and I'm sure we all appreciate to have an international day so we can take pause from our very busy schedules to participate in such conversations. We collectively know that racial discrimination cannot be ended in a single day. We cannot eliminate in a single day. And so we really do appreciate your work. It cannot be the work of racialized minorities, visible minorities, whatever other identifier we choose for the other group. So just a reminder that we have Post-its on the table. So if you have additional questions that you think, we as a organizing committee selected just a few questions. Around the room, you will see the other questions that didn't quite make the discussion points, but are certainly equally important. They're there as resources, so you can continue this conversation and this work as provocations to wherever you go back in your BCIT community. And we also have up on the slide additional resources. So thank you again.